Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Welcome to the race week of the Formula 1 Qatar Airways Gran Premio del Made in Italy del Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend. And Red Bull are looking to continue their absolutely dominant start to the season. 5 races in, 5 race victories, looking on course to secure the 1-2 in the Drivers and the Constructors' Championship at that. The Formula 1 CEO Stefano Domenicali says they will not be looking to make any changes to restrict the dominance Red Bull are currently seeking. In the past, there's been changes that have been made to the regulations to try and slow down a dominant force. He reckons that's not going to happen anytime soon, indicating we might be on course for Red Bull domination until the new 2026 regulations. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to dive into. First of all, I thought this is hilarious really from the Alpine side. We know that recently Lauren Rossi, CEO at Alpine, went, hog wild at his team, called them amateurs, said all this stuff that I don't really imagine is helping their performance on and off track. I will say I'm not really sure what the point is in Alpine as a Formula 1 team, because it used to be Renault. Alpine make a couple of road cars, but nothing spectacular, and they've never really committed the resources necessary, at least from my perspective, to really try and challenge the top teams and the other works teams in Formula 1. The fact that Aston Martin have come along with Mercedes power units, with Mercedes rear suspension and gearbox and other elements of the car, they've spent big, they've recruited big over the last few years, and they've succeeded big relative to expectations so far this season. Alpine are like, hang on a second, this is pretty embarrassing for Alpine, right? Yes, it's embarrassing for Mercedes, it's embarrassing for Ferrari to be behind Aston Martin, but it's certainly embarrassing for Alpine that said, I guess we just can't challenge the top guys, it's tough in this sport. Aston Martin have done it, and that is causing some of their frustrations, especially, right, because Fernando Alonso, their former driver, of all the talk from Alpine that, he's going to regret this decision, Alonso going to Aston Martin, that's obviously massively backfired. Look at these numbers, right? Alonso has the most points in the first 5 rounds of a championship since 2009. Look at his years in Ferrari, McLaren, of course, disastrously so, and then Alpine for a couple of years, 2021, 2022, had 7 points combined in the first 5 races of the last couple of seasons. This year has 75. So great stuff for Alonso, but yeah, pretty damning, it's got to be said, on Alpine. Changes will be coming there, I imagine, in the near future. There was also this from Valtteri Bottas confirming that he definitely has many years left in his career from his perspective. I know there's been questions about Bottas because he hasn't been great so far this season, right? He was okay last year, certainly at the start of it, got a lot of points when the Alfa Romeo was quite good. This year the car isn't very good. Zhou has kind of had his number for a few of the races. Bottas, though, did have a great weekend, at least compared to the car standards in Miami. So, I think he's showing that he's still got what it takes. But with the changes we mentioned yesterday coming to Sauber with Audi and the potential of Vettel and Mick Schumacher and Carlos Sainz or whatever's going on there, you do have to wonder how long Bottas might stay within the organisation. And of course, he was part of Mercedes domination since the Rosberg days, and now we have Red Bull domination as it presently stands with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. 7 years ago today, of course, when Max Verstappen took his first victory as an 18-year-old in Spain at the Barcelona Grand Prix, and Red Bull so far, he's leading the championship. He's probably going to win it once again. It's not as simple as the DRS advantage that Red Bull have, why their car is so good. There's other factors. There's the suspension. Their car seems flawless in many ways, and it seems to work at every Grand Prix weekends. And the comments that Russell made after even Bahrain, that he said they'll win every race this season, doesn't look out of the realms of possibility as it stands. And therefore, the question has been proposed: what are Formula 1 and the FIA, the governing body, going to do about this domination? Do they mind? Is it fair enough for Red Bull to have created the best car by a margin and will reap the benefits of that for the coming years, or should they do something about it? We can look back at the recent eras since 2010. We can see in 2010 there was an average of 54 passes per Grand Prix, and only, the best team won 53% of the races, which was Red Bull during that period where Vettel won all those championships. 2014 to 2016, of course, was Mercedes. They won 86% of races during that time. Then 2017-21 was a little bit less still for Mercedes, and now 22 to 23, Red Bull have won 81% of races in that period, and they looked certain to extend this record even higher than already. So since the regulation changes came in at the start of last season, it's already not too dissimilar to Mercedes 2014-2016, and therefore people are saying make some changes to the regulations to try and slow down Red Bull, make the racing more interesting. Red Bull made a great car, they capitalized on it, they're going to win the championship again. Should they be punished for doing the best job? No, but there's a debate that especially says, given the fact that Stefano Domenicali has been pushing big time with Liberty Media for the last few years, entertainment above all, right? That's all they're trying to do with the sprint races, getting all these celebrities to go to the Grand Prix every single weekend, weekends. Even though I imagine half of them could not tell you what DRS stands for, they're doing, obviously, Drive to Survive was a massive thing as well, and they're really leading into the entertainment side of the sport, the show, the spectacle, all this stuff. And on the whole, it's got its negatives, but it's been good for the growth of Formula 1 as a sport on the whole. The question is, though, if they're doing all that for entertainment, would they not also consider, especially given they've got a lot of new fans coming into the sport from the Drive to Survive stuff, is there not an argument from Formula 1's perspective that actually now more than ever, a period of dominance from a particular team is less optimal than it's ever been with the way they're trying to go as a sport? A period of dominance from teams is inevitable. It's happened time and time again. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, even Red Bull, and now Red Bull again. It happens. It creates legends of the sport, and it creates phenomenal seasons when periods of dominance end up coming to an end. However, with the way that attention spans of people go nowadays, and Domenicali's intention surely to maintain a lot of the newer fans they've developed over the last few years, you might argue that changes to be made to try and bring the pack closer to Red Bull would be in their best interest. But Domenicali says, this year we need to say the truth. Red Bull did a better job than the others, it is a fact. But I would be imprudent to say the championship is finished. I'm not so sure about that one, but okay, it's not mathematically over. We cannot intervene in the performance of the teams. I'm sure what we did in terms of financial regulations will help to minimize the gap on the technical side. So I don't disagree with him on this point. And actually, when you look at this, it's quite interesting to see that this is Miami race pace last year to this year. Last year, Red Bull and Ferrari were quite close. Then it was way back to Mercedes, even Alfa Romeo, Alpine, etc. And the gap last year between the third fastest team, Mercedes, and the front was about double what it was this year. But it's the same across the board. Look at McLaren, technically the slowest team that weekend. Aston with the slowest team last year with a 2.2 second gap to the fastest. This year, the slowest car was a 1.4 second gap. It does feel like with these regulations coming in as they have, the budget cap era we're now in, the fact that the cars towards the back of the grid get more development and testing time, it does seem to have closed the pack. It has worked in some sense. A lot of the cars in the midfield here have been super competitive lately in race pace, but Red Bull have absolutely nailed it and they're miles ahead of everyone, right? The gap at some Grand Prix this season between the second fastest car and the slowest car has been pretty similar to the gap between Red Bull and the second fastest car. It's not quite that here, but it's still pretty impressive for Red Bull. Now, fundamentally, Mercedes and Ferrari have dropped the ball, right? The idea that Aston Martin have gone from where they were to where they are now, given the parts they have, the Mercedes power unit, etc., Mercedes should be, on this evidence, much closer to Red Bull than they are. Same story with Ferrari. So I'm not sure it's necessarily Red Bull have nailed it, but obviously those other two teams have dropped the ball, and fundamentally that's why we don't have a competitive championship. The issue you run into, though, it's a byproduct of what we just mentioned. The budget cap, the kind of wind tunnel development situation, that has helped, I think, it seems to me at least, close the pack together, which I think it might well have been successful in doing so, but it also means that catching up to the fastest team in Red Bull is nigh on impossible according to some of the teams. This is certainly the argument from Toto Wolff and Fred Vasseur and others. This was the comment from Toto Wolff recently that they would bring twice as many changes to Imola if they could. They would change the chassis, they'd bring an entirely new B-spec version, and they would start from scratch. And if they had infinite money to spend, that's what they would do, and you wouldn't bet against Mercedes catching up to Red Bull in that scenario. The issue is for Mercedes, they are 12 months behind Red Bull in development at least, and can they realistically catch that up? Next year, Red Bull are going to refine their pretty much perfect concept even further with further innovations that Mercedes won't even be able to consider for another 12, 18 months down the line. If there's no changes to the regulations, it's really hard to see any team but Red Bull winning in 24 and 25 until the new regs come in 26. So do we just have to accept this as the reality of the situation, that Red Bull are going to win 85% of races from now until 2026? Of course, it's not guaranteed, but there's been questions for obviously many years whenever Mercedes were dominating, whenever Ferrari were dominating, statements from Christian Horner and others to say, look, change the regs, Mercedes are too good, we've got to make the sport interesting. And on occasion, they have done so, right? There was the argument during the going into 2021, they changed the regs from 2020, and it's pretty unanimously agreed that those regulation changes penalised Mercedes Mercedes low rake design much more so than Red Bull's high rake design, and it makes sense in a way, right? I mean, obviously Mercedes have won the championship 7 years in a row. They won it the next year as well, at least the constructors, right? So it makes sense from the FIA's perspective to make changes that would try and bring someone closer to Mercedes, and that's what they did going into the season. It is pretty well agreed that the changes did indeed, and I think Red Bull and Mercedes both agree that, yeah, those moves benefited Red Bull more than Mercedes at the time, and maybe the argument presently is from the FIA and Stefano Domenicali that we're only 2 years into this period of dominance, really. Maybe we're only 1 year in because it was competitive at the start of last season, but I think most people realise that Red Bull was a car with a higher ceiling than the Ferrari, at least by 10 races into last year. I think that was relatively clear, and they won, what, 17 of 22 races last season, so realistically, it wasn't even particularly competitive. So what do you guys think in the comment section below? I think fundamentally it's on the other teams to do a better job and catch up. I don't want the team that's done the best job to be punished for doing a great job, but I can also see the argument that if Stefano Domenicali and Formula One really want to promote the entertainment of the sport and maintain some of the newer fans that have come in over the last few years, they might need to seriously think about talking to the FIA about this, because if the FIA come out and say, all right, we're going to make a few regulation changes for next year going into 2024, then Red Bull will have to think about that, and maybe it'll hold them back a little bit. The issue for Red Bull is they could probably abandon their car now and put all of their development budget for the rest of this year into next year's car and still win the championship next year anyway, which is where the budget cap has its positives, but it also has its negatives when there is a dominant car, which is going to be very difficult to rein in. There's an argument to say there might need to be other ways of reining in the Red Bull, or it's going to be very predictable for the next few years. But if that's true, then, you know, maybe it's deserved, because Red Bull have done the best job quite clearly and other teams have failed to deliver. So tweet your thoughts in the comment section below. Fundamentally though, Stefano Domenicali, he's the Formula One CEO, but he doesn't necessarily make the calls on this stuff. The FIA themselves, the governing body, the ones that actually decide on the rules, they're the ones that make the call on this. So F1's CEO, there's obviously a relationship there, and if he says don't make any changes, they might not make any changes. But, you know, you'll probably have Toto Wolff and Fred Vasseur trying to figure out ways where they could maybe lobby for some regulation changes in the intention that it might find a way to slow them down. But very much into your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.